I didn't know it then, but everything started unraveling the moment she told me. Dad, pack your bags. I have something special planned for you. I was rinsing out my morning coffee mug, the Arizona sun barely creeping through the kitchen blinds, when her call came in, cheerful, sudden, and far too excited for a Tuesday. My name is Horace Miller, 68 years old, retired electrician, widower, and the kind of man who built a quiet life after 40 years of crawling through attics and fixing other people's emergencies. I spent decades raising my daughter alone, paying her tuition, covering her debts, and helping her restart her life more times than I can count. Hardworking is what people call me. Soft-hearted is what my daughter calls me, usually right before she asks for something. And I'm telling you this story because if someone had warned me that love can blind you more effectively than any scam, maybe I would have seen what was coming long before I stepped onto that ship. When I answered her call, she sounded like she just won the lottery. Dad! I booked you a cruise. A real one. 7 nights. Ocean view. You deserve it. For a moment, I thought she was joking. Emily hadn't paid for her own phone bill in months. How could she suddenly afford a luxury vacation for me? Emily, slow down, I said. A cruise? Why now? Because you never take care of yourself, she insisted. You've worked your whole life. Let me do something for once. Just say yes. Her voice had that sugary urgency I'd learned to recognize, half affection, half performance. But she kept talking, stacking reason upon reason, flattering me in ways she rarely did. You're always alone in that big house. You need a break after your heart scare. You never treat yourself, Dad. By the time she said, I already paid, so it's non-refundable, I felt cornered but touched. No one had surprised me with anything in years. The idea of ocean air, quiet nights, and time away from pill bottles and empty rooms, it almost felt healing. All right, I finally agreed. If you're sure. I'm positive, she said. This is the best gift I've ever given you. Just promise me one thing, disconnect for the week. Don't worry about emails, accounts, anything. I'll help set up everything before you go. That should have been my first warning. Emily never cared whether I relaxed. She cared when I was distracted. But I ignored the knot forming in my stomach. I wanted to believe my daughter was capable of pure generosity. I didn't know she had already planned every step, from the cheerful phone call to the moment the cruise ship pulled away from Miami, and I discovered she had blocked my number before the first night even ended. The morning I left for Miami, I tried to convince myself the uneasiness was just nerves. Emily had texted twice before sunrise, overly cheerful, overly helpful, reminding me to bring sunscreen, comfortable shoes, and nothing important you'd stress over if it got lost. That last part stuck with me, but I brushed it off as her usual attempt to sound wise beyond her years. At the airport, I moved slowly, careful with my heart medication in my jacket pocket. I wasn't used to traveling alone. My wife had always handled the logistics. Emily used to dart in circles around us when she was little, excited about everything. I held on to that image as I stood in the security line, trying to match it with the adult version I was dealing with now. While waiting at the gate, I reread her messages. I'm so proud of you for doing this, Dad. A week of rest will change your life. Don't overthink. Just enjoy. They sounded sincere. They also sounded rehearsed. Once I boarded the plane, the man who took the seat beside me, a younger guy with a laptop, glanced at my boarding pass and smiled. Cruise? I nodded. Solo? Yes. My daughter insists I need a break. He laughed. Must be nice to have someone push you into relaxation. I forced a chuckle, but something about that phrasing, push you, settled wrong. When we landed in Miami, the humidity wrapped around me like a blanket. The noise, the rush, the crowds moving with purpose, it all felt louder than I remembered from my working days. I followed the armada of vacationers toward the shuttles, clutching the envelope Emily had overnight to me with the cruise documents. Oddly, none of it was digital. She said it was to make things easier, But the paper packets felt outdated, almost intentionally so. Boarding the ship should have been exciting, but the check-in line was long, and my chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something else, the vague feeling of being maneuvered. When it was my turn, the agent scanned my documents and smiled warmly. "Mr. Miller, everything is prepaid. You're all set." "All set," I repeated, as if saying it would make it true. In my cabin, a surprisingly nice room with a balcony, I placed my bag on the bed and sat for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the ship settle into my bones. I texted Emily a photo of the ocean view. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. No reply. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I tried again, telling myself she was busy. Then I tried Todd. No answer. I stepped onto the balcony, leaning against the railing as the ship began to tremble beneath me. The port workers pulled the ropes. The horn echoed across the water. Everyone around me cheered. But my phone stayed silent. And with every passing second, the knot in my stomach tightened, because I couldn't shake the feeling that the real reason Emily wanted me far from home wasn't rest. It was access. By the second morning on the ship, the novelty had worn off and the silence around my unanswered messages had grown heavy. I kept checking my phone even though I knew the signal was weak out at sea. Still, texts should have delivered, even slowly. Yet every one of my messages to Emily sat there with a single gray check mark, sent, but never received. After breakfast, I walked the upper deck, trying to lose myself in the shuffle of tourists lining up for pooled chairs and overpriced cocktails. Couples posed for photos, kids darted through crowds, retirees waved at dolphins breaking the water's surface. Everywhere I looked, people were celebrating something. I felt like the only one trying not to think too hard. Back in my cabin, I tried calling Emily again. Straight to voicemail. Todd, too. This time, instead of the usual ringing, the call failed instantly. That sinking feeling in my gut sharpened. I opened our message thread and saw what I hadn't been prepared to see. "You can't send messages to this user. They've blocked you." For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. My ears rang, drowning out the ocean outside my balcony. I tried again, but the same message punched back at me. Emily had blocked me, intentionally, clearly, unmistakably. I sat down slowly, lowering myself onto the edge of the bed like a man twice my age. My first thought was that something horrible had happened. Maybe she lost her phone. Maybe Todd had done something. Maybe she panicked. But as much as I tried to twist logic into comfort, the truth pressed harder. Blocking isn't an accident. Blocking is deliberate. Blocking has motive. I placed my phone on the nightstand, but my hands kept drifting back to it. The last time Emily blocked me was 4 years ago, during the mess with her credit cards. Back then, she was angry I wouldn't co-sign a loan. Now she'd sent me on a cruise before cutting off contact altogether. I tried to distract myself by exploring the ship. I walked past the theater, the shops, the casino, everything gleaming and carefully designed to make people forget real life. But every step only deepened the unease. My mind kept looping back to one detail I hadn't allowed myself to examine too closely. Before the trip, Emily insisted on helping me organize my phone. She'd held it in her hands for almost 10 minutes, tapping through settings and apps, telling me she was updating my boarding pass. I remembered the brushing of her hair against my arm, the way she angled the screen away from me, not suspicious then, but now impossible to ignore. By late afternoon, the sun had dipped low enough that shadows stretched across the deck. I sat at the railing and watched the trail of white water behind the ship. Families laughed, waiters passed with trays of drinks, music thumped from the pool speakers. But beneath it all, an unmistakable truth settled into my bones. Emily didn't want to reach me. She didn't want me to reach her. And now, hundreds of miles from home, I had no choice but to ask myself the question I'd avoided since boarding. What exactly did she need me out of the way for? By the third evening, the question had burrowed deep enough that I could no longer pretend this was normal. I needed answers, real ones. So when the ship docked at our first port, a tourist-packed stretch of turquoise shore and souvenir stands, I headed straight for the nearest cafe advertising free Wi-Fi. The moment my phone connected, notifications flooded in, bank alerts, but not the kind anyone wants to see. At first, I thought they were errors. Then I opened the banking app, and the truth hit so hard I had to steady myself on the table. Several large transfers had been made from my savings account. Then from my checking. Then from the emergency fund I kept separate. All within the last 36 hours. Tens of thousands gone. The kind of money you don't lose by accident but by intention. My first instinct was denial. Maybe my bank froze something. Maybe they flagged something. Maybe Emily was scared, confused, in trouble, some twisted scenario where she'd panicked and borrowed without telling me. But the recipient information shattered even that fragile hope. The transfers were routed to a digital wallet account with a masked ID, exactly the kind Todd once bragged about setting up when he talked about private channels and untraceable investments. I felt my throat tighten. Emily blocking me now made sense. Not emotional distance. Not a tantrum. Access. That was the word that finally landed with undeniable clarity. She had my passcode. She had my phone in her hands before the trip. She had spent the last few months casually asking about my finances. Are you still using that retirement account? Do you ever check your old savings? Can you teach me how to log into the bank app? Questions I mistook for interest in my well-being. I contacted the fraud department immediately. The cafe was loud, but the world felt muffled around me. The representative walked me through freezing every account, flagging every withdrawal, locking every card. We'll investigate, she said. But you contacted us in time. That's good. Very good. It didn't feel good. It felt like betrayal wrapped in paperwork. When the call ended, I opened my messages one more time, scrolling through the dozens of unanswered texts to Emily, pictures of the ocean, updates about the ship, little notes a father sends a daughter when he believes she's thinking of him too. Seeing those messages now felt humiliating. One-sided affection scattered across the screen, each one more naive than the last. I tried calling her again, even knowing she'd blocked me. The call failed instantly. Todd, too. You okay, sir? The barista asked as she wiped down a nearby table. I swallowed hard. No. Not really. She paused, concern flickering across her face. Need help? I almost laughed. I wish it were that simple. As the ship horn bellowed in the distance, warning passengers to return, I stood and tucked my phone into my pocket. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been since the trip began. The shock had burned away, leaving something colder, sharper. Emily hadn't just sent me away. She'd removed the witness. She'd isolated the one person who could stop her. And now I understood what she needed me gone for, and who she had become while I wasn't looking. By the time the ship reached its second port, the shock had settled into a cold, deliberate resolve. I wasn't going to spend another day floating around the Caribbean pretending I was on vacation, while my daughter and her boyfriend gutted my life back home. So I booked an early flight off the island the moment the ship's Wi-Fi signal sharpened enough to load the airline's website. The ticket was expensive, last minute, one seat left, but losing more time felt far costlier. Once the plane touched down in Phoenix, I drove home in a rental car, my pulse thudding with every familiar street I passed. I expected chaos, broken locks, maybe even strangers inside my house. But the property looked exactly the same, quiet, undisturbed. At least from the outside. Inside, the real damage showed. My home office had been rummaged through, not trashed, but sifted with precision. Desk drawers half opened, filing cabinets slightly ajar, safe moved a few inches from the wall. Emily knew where everything was. She grew up in this house. Nothing would have felt unfamiliar to her hands. On my desk sat something I didn't expect, a printed rental listing for my home, complete with staged photos and an asking price that told me exactly how far she and Todd intended to take this. Immediate availability, it said. owner traveling long term. They weren't just cleaning me out financially. They were planning to erase me physically. I stood in my living room for a long time, looking at the space that had held every memory of my marriage, my daughter's childhood, my entire adult life. And for the first time since the phone call that started all this, I didn't feel confusion or grief. I felt clarity, the kind that comes only after you stop hoping someone will be who they used to be. I called my bank's fraud investigator first, then the police, then a lawyer, each conversation stitching another thread of protection back into the fabric of my life. Screenshots, timelines, transaction IDs, the blocked messages, the cruise paperwork, every piece fit together more cleanly than I wanted to admit. By late afternoon, the case was already moving. My accounts were secured. The rental listing was flagged and removed. And by evening, I had a temporary security system installed, a precaution I never imagined needing against my own child. As the sun dipped behind the Phoenix skyline, I sat at the kitchen table Emily once used to do her homework. I thought of the little girl who used to draw birds with crayons and bring me misspelled notes, saying she loved me. Bigger than the whole sky. I thought of the woman she grew into, a woman who saw my life not as something to honor, but as something to harvest. She still hasn't called. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to lie. But I'm not waiting anymore. This is where the version of me she counted on, the forgiving father, the soft heart, the man who would give until he broke, finally ends. And where the man she hoped would never stand up to her, finally begins.